Hey, welcome everyone. What a treat to have your presence today for this very, very notable moment in the history of my professional life, but I think all in the history of the country. This is celebrating Earth Day today, and this has a very special significance for me. It was on this day uh, in 1970. Yeah, can you believe that? Just think of those number of years ago. So that was 55 years ago that I was hired to take on my first real job as an assistant professor of nutritional biochemistry and environmental science, starting a brand new environmental science program at the University of Puget Sound in Tacoma, Washington, where I was hired to be the first person to establish that program. So I've always felt very interested about how this all kind of fits together over the last 55 years, because I was both pursuing research and development in the area of nutritional biochemistry while also building out the University of Puget Sound environmental science program, which then gave me an opportunity to be exposed to both worlds and to see how they integrated together and to have the extraordinary opportunity to meet some remarkable people that have become part of my education over those 55 years that I'd like to share some thoughts about that with you that I think is very meaningful today as we're into a new era as it relates to the diet health conundrum or connection. We're starting to see very serious thoughts about how diet, food, nutrients play roles in human health. And from the perspective of looking back to look forward, I think is a pretty important part of what I'd like to convey to you in this particular discussion. So thanks for being with me, and I hope I can provide some important news to use for you as we get into this topic in greater detail. And my feeling is that what we're going to be seeing as a consequence of the nature of what's going on in the world today is an ever increasing use of the concepts of nutrition as principal therapeutics in healthcare and in preventive medicine. So we're very kind of excited to bring this I guess you'd call it back to the future perspective to you as it relates to how these things all fit together. So why Earth Month and why nutrition? I think that's a really interesting question. So in the next, say, 55 minutes, what I'd like to do is explore how nutrition really links to personal health and planetary health, that these are interwoven together. And I'd like to make that statement that these are connected. Because diets are really important, I think, for us to understand. We want to look at how the environment affects our diet and our food supply through agriculture and its ultimate implications on our health. And then we want to know what the personal health that we all depend upon, how it relates to food quality and sustainability and this concept of what is emerging to be food as medicine, which is, I think, a very interesting part of where this story is. Now, I'm assuming at this point that you can all see the screen. So hopefully that's we've taken care of that little problem now. So let's move ahead here with regard to the information at hand that relates to how food and nutrition play roles in human health and disease. So I've got to find the magic way of advancing the slides here. So we're going to explore nutrition pioneers. Who are the people that really led to this legacy and give us the rich portfolio of new information from which we can design personalized approaches towards nutrition and health. We're going to hopefully be exploring then this food as medicine concept in greater detail. And this labyrinth, and I'm standing on the middle of this labyrinth, we're going to kind of navigate through it to see how personalization and sustainable nutrition all relate to our future. I want to go back and honor deeply three people who I think are fundamental pioneers upon which we rest on their shoulders. I've had the privilege of meeting all three of these people over the course of my professional life, and they've all had really important impacts on me. The first being Francis Moore Lappé, whose book, Diet for a Small Planet, was actually published the year that I started down this adventure in my own life in 1970 at the start of Earth Day and Earth Year. Her work on Diet for a Small Planet, I think, set the tone to look at every aspect of our lives, in a sense, related to the world in which we live and the food in which we eat. She was an advocate for plant-based diets way back when. And you might recall her position was that you could get the same quality of protein out of a plant-based diet by balancing grains and legumes as you could get from eating an animal-based diet. This was a fairly remarkable thought at the time, this is 1970, as it relates to the essential amino acids that you get complementary by the combination of grains and legumes to get the methionine and lysine, tryptophan levels correct that you'd have in a higher quality meat protein. And so if you were eating these together, the biological value of that complementarity gives you a comparable source of quality protein as you'd get eating animal protein. And she pointed out that it takes something like 20 plus pounds of vegetables to make 1 pound of animal protein. And so in terms of ecological efficiency, in terms of the way we look at our ecosystem and our interconnection to it, this plant-based diet could be a very energy efficient and environmentally efficient way of sustaining human nutrition. And she pointed out that people around the world culturally have learned about this from years ago and are implementing it successfully over generations of living, from beans and rice, beans and corn, in many different countries where these diets don't have the luxury of a lot of animal products. The second person I want to give great umbrage to is Adele Davis, and I think all of you are familiar with Adele Davis and her work if you've done anything in the field of nutrition. Her books sold millions of copies. Eat Right to Keep Fit and Disease-Free. Her Let's Get Well books. I recall these sitting on my mother's shelf, upon which myself and my sister were raised. We were, I guess, advocates of the Adele Davis approach to nutrition. She criticized processed foods. She was a pioneer in nutrition education with her background in formal education, both at USC and UCLA, and was really the first person to start talking about dietary supplementation and selected needs in a depleted diet from overprocessed foods. And hanging out in Southern California at the time, she met a lot of health advocates, people down in Venice Beach, Muscle Beach, and people that were starting to put together health and exercise and nutrition into formalized programs. She was really a pioneer in nutritional therapeutics, and I would give her a tremendous amount of credit for birthing the field that we enjoy today. Beyond that, the third person obviously is Rachel Carson. The Environmental Awakening of All of Us with Silent Spring, this incredibly important book that really, as she said, the more clearly we can focus on wonders and realities of the universe, the less taste we have for its destruction. And of course, her whole concept about the bioaccumulation of pesticides and the effect that they have on animal life and all biota was really a springboard, I think, into the start of the organic foods movement and organic agriculture. And so you put these three remarkable women together that brought to bear these visions that they each shared, and you start to define a different role of food and health than that which was the standard fare before. So what is the dominant view of food today? And it really has come out of the industrial food system. And it believes, and I'm going to make this kind of overstated to make my point, this construct of industrial food production is built around the concept that food is a collection of chemicals. Protein, carbohydrate, fats, vitamins, and minerals, all these things mixed together in these foods, and they can be reconstituted, remixed, re-engineered into other things. And so the modern food processing industry predominantly operates from this reductionist technochemical paradigm in which food is seen as a sum of its parts, the macro and the micronutrients, additives, and other functional ingredients, all of which can be isolated, modified, recombined, engineered into a desired outcome function. And the outcome then will be built around this nutrient engineering, around nutrient fortification. Remember, we started to do that after World War II, adding selected vitamins to foods to prevent deficiency symptoms because the foods were so highly processed. Those natural nutrients had been removed, so they had to be added back in selected ways to prevent scurry, beriberi, pellagra, xerophthalmia, and rickets. And so then we have the shelf life optimization. We put all sorts of ingredients in there to make sure that they can stand up and be bug-free for months, if not years. And so we have all these new additives that are put into food. And then we have humectants and emulsifiers and various flavorings and flavor enhancers like MSG. All these things lead to this kind of concept that we can chemically modify and engineer food to be whatever we want it to be. Now, that is kind of different from what my good friend, Dr. Marianne Nessel, talked about when she said food manufacturers are not in the business of health, public health. They're in the business of selling food products that make money and stay on shelves and are convenient and easily available and are reasonably inexpensive. That's their reason for being. That's their raison d'etre. But we recognize that all of our health is actually dependent upon what we eat. And it seems like there's a kind of a break there in logic that we see as food as a collection of chemicals, and we engineer for certain kinds of characteristics of yield, profitability, and shelf stability. But yet, actually, the food that we're eating is a very central promoter or contributor to our viral physiological process that's associated with our health. So there is where the break kind of is seen. And so this birthing of the ultra-processed diet leads to a dual crisis then. We then drive chronic illness as a consequence of nutrient imbalances from these chemically modified foods. And we also cause ecological disruption by the way that we're growing these things under monoculture, using a lot of supplemental fertilizers, various biological pesticides, herbicides, and that influences both micronutrient and macronutrient quality and quantity. And it actually increases the jeopardy on our land, as we know, and our ecology. So we've gotten into this now recognition over the years of the things that Adele Davis, well, all three of these pioneering women we're talking about are really part of the legacy of what we're dealing with now in trying to find a way out of it. How do we then reduce the unnecessary burden of chronic illness that's associated with these dietary changes that started way back, really coming out of World War II with the development of rations for service people during the war that were then pre-engineered and pre-packaged types of foods. So we have a legacy going back from the 1930s, that we're now trying to overcome by implementing some of the concepts that are associated with biological, positive outcomes. So this is the emerging functional and systems view of food and nutrition. It's the back to the future view, that food is information that then signals to our body in very remarkable ways as to how it's going to function. And we see food in a different way as this matrix of complex biological matrix that nutrients serve as information molecules that stimulate the production of various substances from gene expression patterns. As we've become much more sophisticated about understanding cellular biology and molecular biology, understanding the signals that cells take up to create their function, we start to recognize food is a principal information for our genes that helps it to regulate its function. And therefore, it impacts all sorts of things through the gut microbiome, our cellular immune system, our nervous system, metabolic networks are all influenced by the information that we take in from our food. So food synergy, and then its interrelationship to health benefits and bioactive compounds in food that are natural, like flavonoids, short-chain fatty acids, and various phytochemicals. How food interacts with our microbiome, this living community that's in our gut that then has its own personality and signals to the body. And this view then that all these things relate to food as having a personality that we might actually even see as a kind of a medicine, as as a part of creating a body's positive outcome based upon compatibility with our long history of genetic natural selection. And so all these things are, again, coming to play as we're trying to seek out ways of reducing and damping down this extraordinary burden that's increasing of chronic age-related diseases that are all diet-related. So this is the point where we're kind of re-exploring our fundamental principles and processes around the history that we have derived our background from. So if I was to summarize this, food as a collection of chemicals is the kind of the post-technological view of the food development industry. Food is just a sum of its chemical parts. And the food science is developed on engineering flavor, texture, and stability, optimizing profit and palatability. It has a top-down product design component, as contrasted to this new view, new but old view, naturally biologically compatible view. The food is an information matrix. It has a synergistic effect of how all these things are working in the natural food. Focus on preserving then the biological functions of these as they signal to the body how it's going to operate, and optimize then not just production of yield, but optimization of health span and resilience, the health value equations that come out of eating. So this is a bottom-up soil to cell type of approach. It's based on what I think is more contemporary knowledge. It's not the way we regulate foods historically. It's built on the new contemporary science, food science, molecular genetics, epigenetics, all the things that we now can layer on top of our understanding of food and history that gives us a better advantage as to how to move forward with our diet and our eating habits to improve health. So this is nutrition's role in disease. And we're starting to see that chronic diseases are related to this altered food supply system, these high-calorie, low nutrient density foods. We suffer from the malnutrition of too much of too little, overconsumptive undernutrition, as it's sometimes called. And we're not getting the right signals from our diet that create then our genes friendly responses. So we get responses of genes that feel they're being offended. That leads to the hostility of our genes then are producing alarm molecules that we call inflammatory mediators. And therefore the disorders we have today are disorders of inflammation, as if our body is doing battle against that where we're living and what we're eating. It's a whole different view at a cell biological level of how nutrients are playing roles in our health outcomes, and the way that we've used this model of chemical engineering to produce these processed foods that are not compatible with the history of how cells really best function. So that leads into then asking questions about optimal dietary patterns to support healthy living. And a paper was just published actually in the journal Nature Medicine that I think is a very, very important to kind of review of how we actually see certain dietary patterns across different cultures influencing health outcomes. And those are illustrated in the little spreadsheet on the right there in terms of green or red outcomes in terms of health characteristics. And what we really see is that there's a very powerful effect of nutrients that come from complex, minimally processed diets on associating themselves with healthy outcomes. This is a little bit like what we've learned from the Blue Zones with Dan Buettner, that certain regions of the world are associated with people who have extraordinary longevity, and they eat diets that have certain kind of common characteristics, minimum processing, balance between lots of plants and lots of colorful plants, and smaller amounts of animal products, but again, staying close to the land and the soils and the whole process of natural cycles. So interesting part of our development, and we now start to recognize that as we move forward with this model, that we have the ability to create really new dietary approaches towards improving health and therapeutic diets that relate to our kind of foodist medicine associations. So now with that in mind, if I can quickly see what's going on here. It looks like I have, for some reason, oh, here we go. Okay, so we're back into a discussion about regenerative agriculture and nutrient density. So what we started to recognize is soils play a big important role in the quality of the foods that are grown on them. And then that has an impact upon the animals that eat the foods that are grown on the soil. So all of these are part of a system, this through line of interconnectedness between the planet, the soil, the microbiomes of the soil, and the microorganisms, sometimes called the mycorrhiza of the soil. It's communication with the plant. The plant then produces its secondary products from its metabolism. Those are then ultimately harvested and are consumed either directly by us, processed into other products, or eaten by animals. We eat those animals. So all of these things are interconnected, this through line, this chain of interrelationships. And we can say then that health to some reasonable extent that starts in the soil, because it's a very important part of this whole matrix of that's ultimately going to regulate how our food and our food supply system operates. Well, this was a major threshold, I think, of learning that I want to give a moment of extraordinary respect to. This led to the recognition of in a group of individuals that became a movement in the United States. It really started back with the three women I was originating this discussion, that became the pioneers in the development of the organic food standards and the Organic Standards Act that was finally approved by the U.S. government, the USDA. That was a major, major transition, and I feel very pleased and proud and privileged to have been involved with in a very small way with that movement way back when in the 60s and 70s and into the 80s with the development of the Organic Standards Act and the approval of an organic standard by the federal government. There were so many people involved, and I had the chance to interact with a number of them. People that were the founders of the original natural food stores, moving from the health food stores to these broader stores that were really advocating and pioneering a food supply system that was going to preserve the natural diversity of nature and preserve the planet in the process. People like Mark Retzloff, John Mackey, Walter Robb, Sandy Gooch, Haas Hassan, Mel Coleman with the first natural beef being produced, Stan Amy, Peter Roy, Doug Green, the founder of New Hope Communications. All these individuals, with many, many others, were fundamentally valuable contributors to the development of the Organic Standards Act and the changing of agriculture in the United States back into this preservation, sustainable philosophy. And I want to give a moment of thanks and respect for all that work that went into this. It was really the birthing of the natural foods movement and the work on the shoulders of these individuals and many others that we have been able to build this architecture for a different way that food relates to health. And there are so many stories that I could go into over those years, and a lot of upward climbing and a lot of 3 steps forward and then 2 back. But ultimately, the Organic Standards Act was approved. It has become a guidepost. We're now moving into regenerative agriculture standards. All of this is a positive step for this ecological understanding of the origin of our food and how it contributes to our health. So that leads into then this development of personalized nutrition. And some of you know I've been, over the last 50 years, a pretty strong proponent of how food is for the individual. Food of one may be the poison of another, to say it in a way that has been said in the past. We recognize that the origin of personalized nutrition really is built out of this concept of biochemical individuality. And I want to, again, pay respect for some very important people that were building out this concept. One, of course, is Linus Pauling, this extraordinary visionary, 2-time Nobel Prize winner, one in chemistry, the second in peace, along with his wife, Eva Helen Pauling. He advocated the use of vitamin C for common colds and flu. You probably know that really birthed the dietary supplement industry and made it a common feature where everybody knows about vitamin C and the common cold. So I think we can almost attribute the birthing of dietary supplementation to the Linus Pauling concepts. And then he proposed this orthomolecular medicine concept that is now, over the last since 1968, when that article was published, Orthomolecular Psychiatry in Science Magazine. We've seen this growing into a broad global understanding of how nutrients can be used in specific doses to replace in that individual needs that they have in order to optimize their function. One of his students and colleagues was another extraordinarily important individual, Dr. Roger Williams, who was at the University of Texas for many years as a key nutritional biochemist, publishing hundreds of papers, and the father of the concept of biochemical individuality. He was the first one to really use biochemical individuality as a concept in the Lancet medical magazine, and his concept was nutrition is for real people, statistical humans are of little interest. Now, why is that an important quote? Because often our nutrition suggestions are built on data from studies around average people, about the mean, about statistical average, in which he pointed out very real and become ever more real as we've understood more about genetics, that each of us carries unique characteristics, and therefore nutrition is for real people, statistical humans are of little interest. And this introduction of the concept of biochemical individuality, which he really birthed along with his mentor, Linus Pauling, that became the whole movement that underpins the therapeutic nutrient movement and medical nutrition therapy, I think goes way back to really the early 70s, when this started to become much more well understood, this personalized nutrition concept. So again, thank you, Dr. Williams, and thank you, Dr. Pauling. And then the third of my list, four, is Dr. Avram Hoffer. Dr. Hoffer, MD, PhD, psychiatrist, and organic chemist, was the father of orthomolecular psychiatry, the use of nutrients for the management of neuropsychiatric problems. Again, this came out of his work as a farm boy in Saskatchewan, in which he solved the concepts of nutrient deprivation with pellagra in individuals that were suffering from niacin, vitamin B3 deficiency, and the symptoms of that were the 3 Ds, diarrhea, dermatitis, and dementia. And he got wondering if it couldn't be that mental illness could be in some people a consequence of the insufficiency of specific types of nutrients that didn't meet their unique genetic need. That was the basis of orthomolecular psychiatry that is now growing up to be hugely more well understood, and people looking at nutrient impacts upon neurological function. This has birthed all sorts of disciplines within different departments of medical institutions that are doing research into it. And Dr. Hoffer, who was seeing patients until the last month before his moving on in his late 90s, was this consummate thinker, researcher, clinician who, working with Dr. Pauling and Dr. Williams, really created this legacy around individualization of nutrient needs, and what may be good for one may not be good for another, this concept. And then lastly, the fourth in my list of pioneers is Dr. Bruce Ames, University of California, Berkeley, head of biochemistry at the department there for a number of years. Recently deceased, unfortunately, we lost another great pioneer. But Dr. Ames, who some of you might know about the Ames test, he was the person who developed this salmonella revertant mutant bacterial test for carcinogens that is used by labs all around the world. But his particular concepts around how nutrients play a role in health and disease was very, very consistent with Dr. Pauling, his good friend, Dr. Williams, his good friend, and Dr. Hoffer. And he did a tremendous amount of work in the role of biochemical individual need of various nutrients, published compendium papers that were the standard of identity, including a paper in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, I think is a classic, about the genetic need of a specific nutrient that individuals have far beyond that of their normal RDA level. And he developed what he called the triage theory, that you can go through different levels of nutrition inadequacy. You start off with optimal health with regard to your biological need, and then you can go down from that to suboptimal intake of nutrients where you have chronic symptoms that are not yet to the level where they're acute. Then you go to more acute symptoms of nutrient insufficiency or deficiency. And then finally, you get to deficiency diseases like scurvy, beriberi, pellagra, and xerothemia rickets. And he said we need to be much more aware of how to look at these early stages of nutritional need, these conditionally nutrition presentations that people have, and be much more cognizant of the role that nutrients play in human health, going all the way down to cellular health, to tissue health, to organ systems health, and to whole body health. So if you put these four people together, they were really pioneers, breaking new understanding of the personalization of nutrients and really how that interrelated with selected nutritional supplementation for needs that people might have. So that then led to an extraordinary moment in our history, the 1994 passage, October 5th, of the Dietary Supplement and Health Education Act, known as DSHEA. And I want to just give a little shout out to two principal people that I've had the privilege of knowing for many years, who are very intimately involved working with Senator Orrin Hatch from Utah and Senator Ted Kennedy from Massachusetts, who are principals on the Health Senate Committee that ultimately led to the passage of this landmark bill. This is the way that we really started to see personalized nutrition starting to be legislated into our government. And Lauren Israelson, the founder of the United Natural Products Association, was one of the extraordinarily important legal minds in crafting the language that ultimately went into DSHEA. Mark Blumenthal, the founder of American Herbal Products, and his ABC, the Botanical Council, really put the research behind plant-derived bioactives and how they could actually be seen in the standard of identity, both looking historically at their use and through the science of their pharmacology, ethnopharmacology. All of those things became part of the body of knowledge that we worked on actually through what was called the Natural Product Quality Assurance Alliance that I had the privilege of being a member of, that then was Sandy Gooch and a member of other notable leaders in the field, along with Lauren Israelson's guidance, was able to put a document together, the Natural Product Quality Assurance Alliance standards document that talked about how the industry could achieve high levels of standards and excellence in its products. And that was then read by Senator Hatch into the congressional record and became a document that was very important for Senator Kennedy feeling comfortable then in voting in favor of passage of the DSHEA. The DSHEA is a fantastically important step in the history of our whole industry, like the Organic Standards Act was, because it allowed now claims to be made based upon structure-function relationships, how a nutrient or a valuable nutritional bioactive could actually influence then the function of an individual in a way that would be scientifically supportable based upon good science under the conditions and principles of standards of identity of doing the proper kinds of studies. And so this DSHEA really then set the landscape for what we have then seen grow ever since 1994 into this tremendous industry called the natural products and natural foods industry, and how it interconnected to the Organic Standards Act with the DSHEA to then produce a voice as to how personalized health and personalized nutrition could be orchestrated into an industry that is emerging to kind of be the opposite to that of the chemicals to food industry, with everything being deconstructed into its fundamental and then reconstructed by engineering foods into some new configuration that was shelf stable, profitable, and had certain gustatory or organoleptic characteristics. So I think we're starting to see the framework of that, those early contributors that I mentioned, playing out now into the 21st century, particularly as we've seen nutrition become much more objectified through breakthroughs that are happening in science, both at the clinical level, at the cell biological level, at the genetic level, at the epigenetic level. All of this is coinciding and converging to create this this back to the future, preservation of the integrity of our soil, our plants, and our animals based upon nutrition. So personalization of nutrition is now. We're seeing the fields of nutrigenomics and epigenetics, personalized dietary advice. We're seeing the gut microbiome now as a target for nutrition, this whole advancing extraordinary cascade of new opportunities. And then we're seeing real-time biomarkers that are being able to be used, even things that we wear on our bodies, wearable devices that are for the first time ever giving 24/7, 365 information about how our body's responding to what we eat, how we live, how we think, what we're exposed to. These particular breakthroughs are leading then into the advancing of a whole new view of how nutrition will play roles in human health and prevention of disease as we move forward in their execution and implementation. And so we start looking at micronutrients in a different light in personalized nutrition. We see vitamins as cofactor precursors to regulate how enzymes and proteins function in our body, how methylated derivatives of various nutrients improve their bioavailability and maybe their function, how things that we call antioxidants participate in the regulation of bioenergetics at the energy-producing level of our cells, so-called mitochondria, and how various nutrients in our foods can serve as regulating agents like genistein and diazine from soy that are prohormones that modulate the signaling of estrogen. So all of these things are part of the emerging view of how our diet, in these micronutrients plays a role, along with our macro minerals, calcium, magnesium, potassium, sodium, phosphorus. These are really important regulating agents within our diets that are found in natural products in mineral-rich soils that then lead to plant foods that capture these minerals. And then we have the trace minerals, iron, chromium, selenium, zinc, molybdenum, iodine, manganese. These all play now discrete roles. So it's this combination of what nature has given us that occurs in natural diets that we're starting to understand much more of the biochemical and cell physiological implications of that and how it translates into health patterns. And I'm very excited to see that in the medical education journals of our age, arguably one of the top is the New England Journal of Medicine, and it has started to run a series of articles on medical nutrition, which would have never happened, I think, 10 years ago, but now we're starting to see this happen in a sequence of really well written and highly documented articles. This most recent one that appeared just recently in the New England Journal of Medicine in early 2025 talks about micronutrients. How do you assess the status of vitamins and minerals? What are their requirements? What are the insufficiency and deficiency symptoms? And what do we do in terms of intervention? And so this is a true paradigm shift when we start seeing this in traditional medical journals of high profile, that we're starting to recognize the importance of these compounds, these components of our diet, and how they interrelate into health outcomes, not just the deficiency diseases, but in the functional states to lower the incidence and risk of chronic age-related diseases, energy deficit disorders, mood and mind and memory problems related to cognitive dysfunction, skin problems, vision problems, digestive problems, musculoskeletal problems, all of these things now being addressed as functional states associated with nutritional status. And we go beyond the traditional, what I call fabulous 50. The fabulous 50 are those nutrients that have all been recognized as essential for human health. Now, what does essential mean? It means their absence will produce some kind of overt disease, like vitamin C and scurvy. So those are essential for human health. Our genes don't produce those nutrients, and therefore we have to get them in the diet. And there are about 50 of those across essential amino acids, vitamins, minerals, essential fatty acids, essential amino acids. So beyond that, however, there are what are called conditionally essential nutrients. These are nutrients that are now emerging to be important for individuals with specific needs. So they're not for all people essential, but individuals, as we do personalized nutrition, they can become essential. And that is a very large list of other bioactive compounds derived from foods and function that play important roles in health. Things like the whole family of omega-3 fatty acids, not just docosahexaenoic and icosapentaenoic acid, DHA and EPA, but also DPA, docosapentaenoic acid, or icosanoic acid, or alpha-linolenic acid. All of these are parts of our, or dihomogamma-linolenic acid. There's a whole series of names associated with conditionally essential fatty acids. Then we have bioactive nutrients like gamma-aminobutyric acid that are found in certain foods that have neurobiological effects on mood. We have melatonin, which can be found in plant foods, that has an effect on our sleep-wake cycles and circadian rhythms. We have carnitine that's associated with the transport of fatty acids into the energy powerhouse of our cells that is a very important conditionally essential nutrient for some individuals. Taurine, another for heart health, playing a very important role. The new kind of derivatives of some of the B vitamins, which are the nucleoside versions of niacin, NMR and NMN, which have roles to play in augmenting mitochondrial bioenergetics. These would all be considered kind of examples of conditionally essential nutrients. And then we go into plant-derived phytochemicals, and there's all sorts of these that are now being found to have extraordinarily important functions. Ergothioneine is a really interesting compound that is now starting to be seen as extraordinarily important for mitochondrial bioenergetics, the whole energy support system. Anthocyanins like delphinidin, a blue-colored pigment found in berries that we've recently discovered in Tartary buckwheat, very important in insulin resistance and in anti-inflammation. Homoeryodictyol found in the herb Yerba Santa that has extraordinary effects on regulating cell cycling and reducing oxidative stress. D-chiroinositol, DCI as it's commonly abbreviated, which has positive effects on polycystic ovary syndrome. And these specialized pro-resolving mediators, or SPMs, that are found in certain minimally processed omega-3 fatty acids that have very important anti-inflammatory activities. These are all examples of a whole library of conditionally essential precision nutrients that can be used therapeutically in individuals of specific needs. So this is the birthing of medical nutrition and food as medicine. And as we know, plants have hundreds of thousands of these different types of bioactive materials in them. And it's very interesting to know that there are 30,000 edible plants, of which 90% of our calories come from only 12 of them. Isn't that amazing when you think about that we have so simplified our diets through, soy, wheat, corn, these fundamental commodity grains, commodity agricultural products, that we have extraordinarily limited the range of things that we traditionally have access through the human diet that bring all of their information. And I love this cover of this recent Nature journal, in which it talked about food for thought when we just looked at one family of foods. Look at the different colors of the different varieties from one family of foods. These are all related to the pepper family, the tomato family of foods, showing the diversity just through the colors. Each of those colors is reflective of a different family of phytochemicals. Those phytochemicals all have different physiological and cellular effects. And they're not just antioxidants, they're cell-specific bioreactive materials. And so eating a diet of complexity brings all this information to our genes and regulates functions in ways that we're only now starting to be able to understand through application of the tools that we have from molecular genetics and cell biology today. So this is a really exciting time to be around, because we're validating cultures that have eaten these fundamental diets for centuries and have lived healthily. we're starting to validate what is the differentiation in their diets versus that of the chemicalized, industrialized diets that we've been consuming that lead to ultra-processed foods and increased incidence of chronic illness. And so if we look at the Mediterranean diet as just one example, we see a huge array of these bioactive materials, like in virgin olive oil, the oleopurin and hydroxytyrosol. In red grapes, you all know about resveratrol, one of the stilbenoid polyphenols. In berries, ellagic acid, urolithins that are produced by our gut microbe, metabolizing ellagic acid into these secondary molecules of the urolithin family that have very, very important effects on bioenergetics, on inflammation, about insulin sensitivity. Then we go to various spices like turmeric and curcumin, a bioactive polyphenol, garlic with its whole interesting sulfur family of bioactive molecules that have their own unique effects on physiology, quercetin and rutin that are found in a variety of plants, one of which we're really excited about, which is the Himalayan Tartary buckwheat, which has extraordinarily high levels of these compounds that are, suggested to be able to prevent mutagenic injury to DNA, to regulate the inflammatory immune function, having really dramatic positive effects on establishing health architecture and health outcomes. And then we look at Asian diets. We've kind of concentrated a lot on Mediterranean diets, and I just got back from a tour of the Mediterranean regions from North Africa to Portugal, Spain, Italy, France, into Greece and Turkey, really looking at the diversity of the way the Mediterranean diet is implemented in Sardinia and this whole region, seeing that there is a through line, because the through line is that all these diets eat to foods that have very high levels of these colored polyphenolic and flavonoid materials. So there's something uniquely valuable about these food components. And you see that also in Asian diets. Asian diets are maybe richer in cultured soy products, in sea vegetables. Sea vegetables bring their own family of polyphenols and flavonoids, laminariates that like arambe, kombu, and wakame, that are all plant, sea, vegetable components that bring unique parts to the diet that are comparable maybe to what we saw in the Mediterranean diet as it relates to their influence on cell signaling and gene regulation epigenetically. So we have learned historically so much about certain diet principles that have their positive impact on positive health outcomes. I found this book, The Mediterranean Way, a very interesting example of how combining together these principles of the dietary benefits of the Mediterranean diet with the dietary benefits of the Asian diet produces then a kind of a feature set of virtues that are associated with signaling to cells, tissues, and organs, longevity and lower incidence of inflammatory insult that is associated with chronic illness. So we're starting to, again, back to the future, learn old things in new ways, being able to translate into personalized nutrition intervention using new assessment tools, including wearable devices and biometrics and ways that we can get information about ourselves and how to personalize our program. It is the frontier of the new food as medicine revolution. And the new food as medicine revolution really associates itself with these clinical trials that are now starting to be published that show positive impacts. And the one that we often hear most about is the PREDIMED study done in Spain with several thousand individuals, a very remarkable study which was done with great precision and detail. We know that nutrition studies in ad lib in individuals is very complicated because people have their complex lives. They're not just in a metabolic ward. They're doing stuff, exposed to things. But this PREDIMED study that looked at the impact of the Mediterranean diet with nuts and with olive oil was a really positive indicator of the reduction in the incidence of chronic disease, particular cardiovascular diseases and type 2 diabetes that was associated with the construction and consumption of these kinds of diets. So Now we start to really have proof of concept. It's not just theory. We're actually starting to get proof of concept at the epidemiological and but also at the cellular level, because now this data can be more the connection between various cellular biomarkers with cellular function, and then how that relates to the biological principles, or let's call it the architecture, the signals of the Mediterranean diet that are sending to the genes these epigenetic regulatory processes that ultimately control how we look, act, and feel. It's an extraordinary revolution that we're living through right now, in which we're starting to actually have the tools to demonstrate the efficacy of food as medicine. So what does food as medicine mean today then? That's an interesting question. It means the development of functional foods and use of bioactives in foods that will promote specific beneficial outcomes. It'll talk about specific diets that will be constructed, or food plans that will lower inflammation, improve immunity, and reduce the burden of chronic disease. It will then move nutrition therapy up into the front line, so it becomes a major therapeutic tool that all kind of primary care practitioners will have access to. We'll start to see a combined use of patient advocacy or person advocacy with that of the healthcare community to develop now a fundamental approach towards moving away from industrialized diets into these personalized approaches towards harnessing foods with high biological positive signaling to gene and epigenetic effects into function. And I think that then leverages what we learned through Organic Standards Act and what was allowed through the DSHEA as positive health outcomes. So One Health environment, the connection then between our diet and our nutrition, our food, and our immune system function. So we're starting to see the integration of all of these things into where the body is speaking to the outside world 24/7, 365. It's through the immune system. The immune system is in direct relationship with the outside world, and its function is to a large extent dependent upon the state of its bioenergetics, which is controlled by the quality and quantity of the diet. So diet is more than just zinc and vitamin C and glutamine and a few nutrients. The diet plays a very important role as signaling to the immune system how to epigenetically regulate its function. This is a front-level new emergence of understanding in the revolution of nutrition therapeutics. And so if we look at a recent study that I think combines this together, this is a fascinating study just published in 2025 in Nature Medicine, looking at immune-metabolic effects in a group of Tanzanian Africans, some of who have taken on a westernized diet, and others have continued to stay on the African heritage diet. And the photos that are on the right here describe the difference between the westernized diet, how it looks, versus the diet of the heritage African diet, which uses things like banana leaves that have been fermented. So much more fermented foods, much more plant foods, much more vegetables of different colors, meaning they carry a lot of these interesting signatures of different polyphenols and flavonoids. And then looking at the health outcomes in individuals between these two groups, these free-ranging individuals, both in the same area, sharing similar gene pools, but one group on the westernized diet and the other group on the African traditional diet. And the health outcome difference is stunning. These were 75 young and healthy volunteers assigned. Some of these were in their urban areas of Tanzania, looking at primary outcomes in immune and metabolic profiles before and after the intervention. And this is only a 4-week intervention. And I want to emphasize how quickly our body's immune and metabolic state can be influenced by a change in diet. 1 month, and you start seeing change in immunological parameters and change in metabolic parameters between the two diet groups. With the Western diet being associated with a pro-inflammatory state, impaired whole blood cytokine responses to microbial stimulation, versus the African heritage diet being associated with a low inflammatory potential, improved glycemic control, improved the immunological, both adaptive and innate immune cell function. So we're seeing in 1 month traditional, what I would call medical food responses from intervention with the appropriate diets that are bringing the right cell signals that create a gene outcomes that are associated with health. These are really powerful breakthroughs in taking abstract, conceptualization, translating into clinical study, and improving using the tools of today, the metabolic and immunological tools, that demonstrate the positive effects. So how do these dietary polyphenols and flavonoids influence metabolism and health outcomes? Well, it's much more than just antioxidants. And we've been studying this at some extent with our group here at Big Bold Health and making our contribution to the field. In fact, I'm holding there some sprouts of Himalayan Tartary buckwheat. Himalayan Tartary buckwheat is 3,500-year-old food. There are over 30 different varieties of Tartary buckwheat. Some are much higher in the ability to produce these polyphenols than others, but they're all much, much higher than that of common buckwheat. This is the Tataricum family versus the Esculatum family. And these Tartary buckwheat plants are biochemical factories producing these immune active polyphenols. Remember, the immune systems of these plants have to be pretty vigorous to be able to live in one of the most hostile places in the world, up in the foothills in the areas of the Himalayas. Bad soils, extraordinary weather conditions, drought, sunburn, all these things the plant has to protect itself against, and it does so by producing this rich immune system in the plant of these polyphenols, which when we eat them, it transfers that immunological protection over into human activity, into our immune system. And when we've done composite analysis of the phytochemicals that are present in the plant, what we find is over 100 different, actually 124 different immune active polyphenols that are found in Himalayan Tartary buckwheat. And it's interesting to note that these are levels that would be considered food as medicine levels. And particularly when you sprout the Tartary buckwheat seeds, as we've done, you produce 2 to 3 times the level of these polyphenols in sprouting. And now, just a couple of teaspoons of the sprout powder is equivalent to a half a cup of the flour of the Tartary buckwheat. And now you really have a food as medicine derivative from a natural product. Now you might ask, why does a plant go to the difficulty of making 124 different polyphenols? Why doesn't it just make one? Why doesn't it just make quercetin, or just make rutin, or just make asparagine, or diosmin, or luteolin, or whatever? It makes 124 because it's an orchestra, and it knows that the immune defense of the plant is best achieved when all members of the orchestra are playing. Strings, brass, percussion, and woodwinds all have parts to play. And therefore, nature is diverse in its production of these. Even though it causes the plant a lot of energy requirements to do that, it does so because it is that orchestration, that interweaving of the different personalities at the cell-specific level of these different compounds that leads to their ultimate effects on improving the resistance against abiotic and biotic stress, which is the immune system of the plant, which when we can consider eating these, we get those values. So what are the clinical trials that have been done on Himalayan Tartary buckwheat? Well, we are fortunate. We just published a trial in November of 2024 after 90 days showing improvement in immune system function, epigenetic patterning of the immune system such that changed gene expression patterns such that we saw a 47% increase in the expression of patterns associated with reduced aging of immune system cells. That's a 47% reduction in the rate of aging after 90 days in consumption of these Himalayan Tartary buckwheat polyphenols. So this is where science meets past history. This is where we're starting to really see clinically the proof of concept that there are certain foods that have these dramatic effects in improving our function and resistance against an environment that becomes ever more stressful as it relates to biotic and abiotic stress factors. And so this is what Linus Pauling was talking about, again, going back to his work on structure and function. So we should think of these phytochemicals as keys that unlock the function of genes to produce energy that allow our body to use macronutrients, protein, carbohydrate, and fat in a very efficient way to produce cellular function and enhance longevity. Nutrients, therefore, are information for our genes that regulate genetic expression and control the phenotype, how we look, act, and feel of the individual. Now, let me give an example of how specific this structure and function can be. I think this is an interesting little factoid. So we're all familiar, I think, with caraway seeds, and we're all familiar with spearmint. You know, they're vastly different in their odor and taste. And these are chemical receptors that our body has that pick up the information from those foods. And it turns out that the bioactive ingredients in those foods that give rise to the caraway seed flavor and odor, and the spearmint oil odor and flavor, is a compound called carvone. Now, I've shown the chemical structure of carvone there. Now, you might look at those and you say, but hold it. Those are the same molecules, aren't they? I mean, the ones that make spearmint are the same ones that make caraway or make dill. And dill and caraway both have the same form of carvone, the plus. Now, what do they differ in? They only are differing in one is a right-handed molecule and the other is a left-handed molecule. It's the way they rotate what is called plane polarized light. Every other aspect of these molecules are exactly the same. Yet our body's receptor systems are so specific that they pick up through taste and smell those differences in right versus left-handedness to give an entirely different physiological response. One is the taste of spearmint, and the other is the taste of dill or caraway. Now think about that if you would. Think of how specific our body is for picking up messages from our food, such that just even the handedness, being right or left-handed molecules, can discriminate to such an extent that we have a vastly different response in our physiological response in terms of the flavor profile and the odor profile of spearmint versus caraway and dill. So I think this should be an exemplar as to how specific our diets are in regulating functions of our body. And so if we look at the minus and the plus versions of carvone, what you find is that they have very different physiological effects therapeutically, and they're used in different ways in ethnobotanical medicine because our bodies have different responses to those different structures. So I think this is really important when we start thinking about what we eat, that we're sending very specific signals to our body and how it responds, even through things like probiotics and prebiotics, and how those influence in our health outcomes, and how that then influences our immune system to lead to modulation of our immune system, even in the form of prebiotic fibers like D-chiroinositol, which is found in Himalayan Tartary buckwheat, and how it selectively modulates specific types of bacteria like Akkermansia muciniphila, that it is a food selective for specific types of friendly bacteria of our gut. Our food is information of not only our genes, but the genes also for that of our microbiota. So the next frontier is precision nutrition, metabolomics, food as signals, personalized nutrition at population scale. That's where we're going. And we're seeing a reimagination of the plate to enhance our health outcomes and to embrace planetary health diets that are plant-rich, diverse, and culturally relevant. It reduces food waste. It promotes seasonality and sustainability. It helps to promote planetary health, the soil microbiome. And so my vision is that we think about every bite we take as an opportunity to heal both ourselves and the earth, that they all are interwoven. We can empower the individual about these concepts to make good choices about their diet. We can protect the planet through the way we're eating. We can transform not only our biological system, but the biological system of all plants and animals and microbes that ultimately leads to sustainability of planetary health. And we're all part of this movement by eating regeneratively, by supporting local farms, by really personalizing our nutrition, by learning more about our needs, and advocating food policy change to move away from these chemicalized, industrialized foods and diets into these foods where nature's wisdom is fully expressed through diversity. And so there's many questions and many answers to those questions that come about through the discussion that I've shared with you today. This is an overview of the last 55 years of my history that we've seen this grow up to be at a threshold point of a major, major paradigm shift. So I want to thank you for your attendance, and I want to thank you for being a student of this field and applying it and spreading the news, because I think we have tremendous opportunities to change the health of our country, to change the health of the planet, and to beat back this increasing burden of unnecessary chronic illness. I thank you very much for sticking with me, and I wish you good health, that for all of our planet at a time of great need, where we can take charge and feel that we're the master of our own destiny. We can own our own immune systems and not be a victim of it. Thanks so much. I sure appreciate your attendance.